The crystalline walls of the palace trembled as Queen Zerath's voice echoed through every chamber and corridor, with a fury that made even the oldest advisors step backward in fear. Her 4 eyes blazed with purple fire, and her silver scales rippled like liquid metal across her towering form as she demanded answers from the assembled court about the impossible theft that had occurred within her most sacred vault. Every member of the royal guard stood at attention with their heads bowed low, because none could meet the queen's gaze without risking her wrath, and none had any explanation for how the ancient artifact known as the Heart of Kelvar had vanished from a chamber sealed by technology that predated most known civilizations. The vault's defenses had remained intact with not a single alarm triggered and no sign of forced entry. Yet the artifact that had protected their empire for 10,000 years was simply gone. Katie Sullivan stood among the crowd of palace workers near the back of the throne room, with her small human frame barely visible between the massive bodies of the Keltharian nobles who towered over her like living monuments. She kept her expression neutral and her breathing steady, even though her heart hammered against her ribs like a drum, because she knew exactly where the Heart of Kelvar was, and she knew that admitting the truth would likely result in her immediate execution. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 30 years, and their reputation remained that of primitive newcomers who barely understood the technologies they now used daily. Katie had come to Kelthar Prime as a cultural liaison 6 months ago, with hopes of building bridges between her people and one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations. But what she had discovered in those months had changed everything. She thought she knew about the Keltharian Empire. The Queen's voice rose again, and this time it carried a note of desperation, beneath the rage, because the Heart of Kelvar was not merely a symbol of power, but the actual source of the planetary shields that protected their world from the hostile radiation of their dying sun. Without it, the population would begin dying within weeks, and the Empire would collapse into chaos as refugees fled to colony worlds that could not possibly support such numbers. Katie watched as the Queen's chief advisor, a skeletal being named Vexer, stepped forward to suggest that perhaps an outside force had managed to breach their defenses using technology unknown to the Empire. The suggestion hung in the air like poison, because it implied that the Keltharian Empire, with all its ancient knowledge and supposed superiority, was vulnerable to forces it could not understand or detect. Other advisors began speaking over one another, offering theories that ranged from internal conspiracy to divine punishment, and with each passing moment, the Queen's composure cracked further until Katie could see the genuine terror beneath the royal fury. The Heart of Kelvar sat at that very moment inside a cargo container in the lower levels of the palace, wrapped in Katie's spare jacket and surrounded by mundane cleaning supplies where no one would think to look. She had taken it 3 days ago after weeks of careful planning and observation, because she had learned something that the Keltharian people did not know about their own most sacred artifact. The Heart of Kelvar was not Keltharian in origin at all, but had been stolen thousands of years ago from a peaceful species called the Yevran, who had been systematically exterminated by the early Keltharian Empire in its quest for expansion and power. Katie had found references to this genocide in restricted archives that she had accessed using credentials borrowed from a careless administrator, and the truth had made her physically ill for days. The Yevran had created the heart as a gift meant to be shared freely with any species that needed protection from stellar radiation, but the Keltharians had taken it by force and built their empire on the foundation of that theft and the mass murder that followed. Now the surviving Yevran lived as refugees scattered across the galaxy, with most other species believing them to be extinct and their technology lost to time. Katie had made contact with a Yevran elder named Solm, who lived in hiding on a remote trading station, and when she had told him about the Heart of Kelvar, he had wept openly, because he had thought all traces of his people's greatest achievement had been destroyed. The plan had been simple in concept, but terrifying in execution, and Katie had spent many sleepless nights wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. She would take the heart from the vault using a combination of human intuition and old-fashioned lockpicking that bypassed the Keltharian reliance on energy signatures and biological scans. Then she would smuggle it off-world to return it to the Yevran, who would decide what to do with their own creation. But standing now in the throne room watching the Queen's civilization teeter on the edge of collapse, Katie felt the weight of every life that hung in the balance. The Queen suddenly stopped speaking, and the silence that followed was somehow more frightening than her rage had been. She turned slowly, scanning the assembled crowd with all four eyes moving independently, as if she could identify the guilty party through sheer force of will. Katie knew this was the moment when she had to make her choice, because staying silent would mean watching millions die when the shields failed, but speaking up would mean admitting to a crime that carried the death penalty, and would likely start a diplomatic incident between humanity and the Keltharian Empire. She thought about her parents back on Earth, who had been so proud when she was selected for the liaison program. She thought about Solm and the handful of Yevran survivors who deserved to reclaim some small piece of what had been stolen from their people. She thought about the Keltharian citizens who had been kind to her during her time on their world, and who had no knowledge of the ancient crimes their empire had committed. Taking a deep breath, Katie pushed her way through the crowd, ignoring the annoyed looks from nobles who found her presence offensive. She walked steadily toward the throne with her legs shaking, but her voice ready, because she had made her decision, and there was no turning back now. The guards moved to intercept her, but the Queen raised one clawed hand to stop them, because curiosity had apparently overtaken her. Rage, Katie stopped at the base of the throne platform and looked up at the towering figure of Queen Zarath, meeting her gaze with all the courage she could summon. When she spoke, her voice came out quieter than she intended, but it carried through the silent throne room with perfect clarity. It was me. The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, and then chaos erupted as guards rushed forward and advisors shouted in outrage and disbelief. The Queen remained perfectly still, staring down at the small human who had just confessed to the impossible. Katie continued, speaking quickly, before they could drag her away, explaining about the archives and the Yevran and the truth about how the heart of Kelvar had come into Keltharian possession. She spoke about justice and the right of stolen property to be returned, and about how humanity's fresh perspective on galactic history had revealed crimes that other species had chosen to forget. The throne room fell silent again as her words sank in, and Katie could see various emotions playing across the Queen's alien features when Queen Zarath finally spoke. Her voice was low and dangerous, asking why she should believe anything a confessed thief said about ancient history. Katie met her gaze steadily and told her to check the archives herself, because the truth was there for anyone willing to look beyond the propaganda. She explained that the heart was currently safe in the palace and that she would reveal its location only if the Queen agreed to meet with Solm and hear the Yevran perspective before making any decisions. The gamble was enormous, because Katie had no leverage except the artifact itself and the moral weight of truth. Queen Zarath could simply have her tortured until she revealed the location, but something in the Queen's expression suggested that the possibility of the story being true had shaken her more than the theft itself. After what felt like an eternity, the Queen ordered her guards to escort Katie to a secured chamber rather than the dungeons, and commanded her chief archivist to bring her all records relating to the early Empire period and any references to species called the Yevran. Over the following days, Katie remained under guard, while the Queen and her most trusted advisors pored over documents that had been sealed for millennia. The truth emerged slowly and painfully, revealing that the foundation of Keltharian greatness had been built on genocide and theft. When Solm arrived at the palace under safe passage, the meeting between him and Queen Zarath lasted for hours. Katie was not present for most of it, but she could see the change in the Queen's demeanor when she was finally summoned back to the throne room. The ancient ruler looked somehow smaller and older, as if the weight of historical truth had physically diminished her. Queen Zarath announced to her court that the heart of Kelvar would be returned to the Yevran people as its rightful owners, but that she would petition them to allow it to remain on Kelthar Prime under a shared custody agreement that would acknowledge the Yevran as the creators and the Keltharians as protectors acting on their behalf. Solm agreed to take the proposal to the surviving Yevran councils, because while his people wanted justice, they had no desire to see millions of innocent Keltharians die for the crimes of ancient emperors. Katie was released from custody, and rather than facing execution, she found herself at the center of unprecedented diplomatic